Hi, good afternoon, and welcome back to the College Success Mastery Virtual Summit 2020. I'm Joey Ban from Edu Experts, your host at this summit. This is our last session for today, and in this session, we'll be exploring university options in Europe. Our speaker today, Jennifer Viemont, is the founder of Beyond the States, a resource dedicated to providing students and families a single source of information about over 1,900 English-taught bachelor's programs in continental Europe. Jennifer is considered an expert in the field, and in 2018 wrote College Beyond the States, European Schools That Will Change Your Life Without Breaking the Bank. Jennifer regularly visits schools throughout Europe in order to provide first-hand guidance to families. She does not partner with any universities in order to provide completely objective information. Jennifer and her family recently relocated from the US to Portugal. Her son is attending a university in the Netherlands. So without further ado, let's welcome Jennifer Viemont onto the summit. Hi, Jen. Hi. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much.
Welcome to the summit. We've got still students streaming in. Just a reminder to the audience, at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat section if you're watching from Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, you could type your questions in the comments section. All right, so without further ado, I'll hand the session over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thanks. All right, well, I'm so happy to be here today. I'm Jen Viemont. I'm the founder of Beyond the States, and I was really happy when Joey contacted me because I love Malaysia. We were actually supposed to move there, like now, and my daughter and I spent a month in KL and also Penang in the fall, just fell in love with the country. We were looking at schools, and then a situation with my husband's job required us to be closer to the US time zone. So we are here in Portugal, which is great, but guess what we don't have in Portugal? Laksa. And I would just about kill for some laksa right now. But I'm not gonna talk about food. I could talk about that all day. The other thing I could talk about all day is college in Europe. And that's the topic at hand today. And I'm really excited to tell you about university in Europe. And these are options that have changed my own family's life and have also changed the lives of so many families that I've worked with. So up until recently, I've primarily worked with American families, and a big part of the education I do is to provide information about the benefits of studying abroad, just generally the benefits of studying outside of your home country. Now, families in many other countries like Malaysia already know about these benefits, and they've been sending their kids to countries outside of their own to study for a number of years. I found, though, that a lot of families around the world think that these options are limited to countries like the US, Canada, UK, and Australia, and they don't know about the large number of high quality and affordable options in non-Anglophone countries in Europe. So the other issue is that many families who had previously focused on the US as a place to send their kids now are looking for an alternate plan. You know, the political situation is making coming to the US more difficult and really less desirable, even for those of us who are from there. So today, my hope is to let you know about options you might not have heard about yet. These are affordable options, many at highly ranked universities, with transparent admissions processes that teach fully in English, though they're located in countries where English isn't the native language. So let's jump in. I'm gonna share my screen now, and I'm gonna turn my video off just because I find the video of myself distracting. So let's do this. Let me do that. Give me 1 second here. Technology is not my strong suit. And we want to play. Okay, yay, I did it. It's morning here, so hopefully that means it's gonna be a good day. I accomplished that. So As I said before, I'm Jen Viemont. I'm from the US, originally from Chicago, which is why I talk so fast. I'm going to try to slow down, I promise. But we moved to Portugal this spring with our 16-year-old daughter, Ellie, and my 19-year-old Sam attends Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. It was actually when Sam was about 14 that I started Beyond the States. I'm a planner, so I'd already started to worry at that point about the different problems with the US higher education system. I was worried about the cost. I was worried about the flawed admissions process. I was worried about dangerous student life issues. And I was also worried about issues around educational quality and outcomes. So even though college was still a few years off, I kept my ear to the ground about options. There are absolutely some great schools in the US, but I wasn't finding any that addressed all of my concerns. So then it was back in the spring of 2015, and I was scrolling through Facebook, and I saw an article about an American who was studying in Germany for free and without knowing German. So up until then, I didn't even know there were opportunities to get a full degree taught in English. I thought it was just confined to doing a semester abroad. Even as I read the article, I thought, oh, I bet it's expensive when you factor in living and travel costs, and especially since most countries don't offer free tuition. But I was surprised I had never heard of this option, and I figured there must be some sort of catch. So I spent several weekends sitting on my back porch with my computer, researching, just as a mom, researching and finding out how wrong I was about my preconceptions. So I was really excited by everything I was learning, but it was also super stressful and incredibly confusing because we're talking about a continent here. You know, I wasn't just looking at Germany or just looking at France. We're talking about a number of different countries within a continent. And so each country has its own little systems and admissions and just different details that made it difficult to understand. And there was not one single source of information. And many of the portals were little more than paid advertising sites. So I had a ton of questions, but I realized that I wanted to learn more for my own family's sake. But I also knew that there were other families like me and maybe like you who would want to consider this. So in order to start Beyond the States, I first spent a year researching, visiting schools in Europe, talking to administrators, talking to international students who were already in Europe so that I could provide objective and firsthand information about these options. So I want to say objectivity is very important to me. Our model is different. We don't partner with any schools and we receive no compensation from any of the schools. And this allows me to give information about all of the English taught programs as long as they're accredited. And it also allows me to be honest about concerns and red flags I see when I visit schools. It also allows me to focus on helping students find options that are really the best fit for their personality, their qualifications, their interests, their budget, their preferences. It's a very individual choice. But I have to tell you, these options have changed my family's life in so many ways. For instance, we're paying less, get this, we're paying less for my son's entire tuition for the entire degree program than we would for 1 year in the US. So let's start there. Let's start with cost. So there are more than 1,900 English taught bachelor's degree programs in continental Europe. This includes all of non-Anglophone EU and EEA countries. So that's why you don't see the UK or Ireland on there. The UK is leaving the EU and Ireland's part of the EU, but they're an English speaking country. So of course, both of those places have English taught degree programs. They're just not our area of focus. So for these countries that we focus on, the average tuition for international students is just over 7,500 USD. So that's about 29,545 ringgits. Further, there are hundreds of options under 4,000 USD. We put ringgits on here. I'm speaking more in USD because if you were considering US universities, you might have an idea of what the tuition is there in USD and are familiar with how different 4,000 is to the $40,000 tuitions you'll find in the US. So further, there are 80 that are tuition free, even for international students, tuition free. So this map here is one of my favorite images ever. I feel like I could look at it all the time. It still just blows my mind. The number in parentheses is the number of English taught programs in the country, and the other is the annual tuition. So, so before we go further, actually, let me explain what I mean when I say program. Program basically means your major or your area of study. So for instance, Germany does not have 132 universities that I'm referring to. They have a number of universities with a combined total of 132 options. So it's one of the main differences between Europe and the US is that when you're applying to a specific program at a school. It's like knowing your major ahead of time. And all of your courses are going to be related to this program, except for your electives. So the lack of gen ed requirements is one reason why it takes less time to get your degree. Don't worry if you or your student has no idea what you want to study. There are a ton of broad and multidisciplinary and even liberal arts options. And I'm going to talk more about that soon. I just wanted to explain what program means because you'll hear that word a lot. So it's important though that we think beyond just basic tuition numbers though. There are other factors that affect cost as well. For instance, some schools don't offer any scholarships. Finland, for instance, Finland used to be a country that was free for international students for tuition. It no longer is, but they require that all of the universities offer scholarships for their students. And these aren't need-based and they're not merit-based. Usually it's, if you pass a certain number of classes, you get this scholarship. Or it's, you do well the first year and the second year is half off. They're very generous scholarship options there. And then there are some countries that may have low tuition, but have a really high cost of living. And then there's also proof of means to consider. So what this means is that in order to get a student visa, you have to demonstrate that you have a certain amount of money to live on for the year. And that number varies based on the country and is based on the country's cost of living. So if the proof of means in the Czech Republic is going to be much lower than the proof of means in, say, Denmark, because the cost of living is so different in the two countries. So let's just take a look at how some of these considerations play out. So Norway is one of the countries that offers free tuition at their public universities. And I'm not gonna lie, it's an amazing country. It's peaceful, but it's also vibrant at the same time. I've traveled to a lot of expensive cities, but I was really blown away at how much day-to-day things cost here. Things like public transportation or other things you need, like Band-Aids were incredibly expensive here. And then we have Estonia, where the average tuition is not free, but it's incredibly affordable at 3,840, I think that's USD, per year. So before starting Beyond the States, I could not have placed Estonia on the map. The American education system does not do well with geography, and I struggled with that. So after visiting though, I really think this is a country that's a hidden gem for international students. My husband accuses me of bringing up Estonia anytime I talk about college in Europe, but it's because I think it's such a hidden gem. They're one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. They're known as the next Silicon Valley. They're actually an e-society, and internet access is a defined human right. They have reasonable tuition, they have affordable cost of living. It's really easy to explore other parts of the world. They have a really wonderful airport that's gotten great reviews. Who knew that airports had reviews? But it's a wonderful airport. Helsinki is just like a 2-hour ferry ride away. And then Russia's even right there too. And there are some incredible opportunities to learn from them around technology, and the internship opportunities within the country are incredible too. So there have been some students who I work with, and I do a service called the Best Fit List, where I create a short list of programs that fit the students' interests, qualifications, budgets, all of that. And they've been a little skeptical when I suggested schools in Estonia. And then they've looked into it, get really psyched about it. And we have a few who are studying there now and just love it. That said, none of them would have said to themselves before that, hey, I'd really like to study in Estonia. So even though there's tuition in Estonia and not in Norway, a student would pay $2,358 less per year in Estonia. And there are opportunities for further savings through scholarships, which aren't available in Norway. So I mentioned my son, Sam, and he attends Erasmus University Rotterdam. So this is a top 100 globally ranked university, yet the tuition is only $7,887 per year. And the program takes just 3 years to complete. So in tuition over the 3 years, it'll be a total of $23,661. So I looked online, and it looks like University of Wisconsin, Madison has a high number of Malaysian students. So I thought that might be one you're familiar with or you've looked at, so we'd compare prices there. These are also both schools that are ranked between 50 and 75 in the world, so it's comparable. And so as you can see, tuition for just 1 year at this university is $38,634, which is $15,000 more than the full 3-year program at Erasmus. Even after factoring in travel and housing, student visas, all those little extras, the savings are just mind-blowing. I mean, the savings, we're talking about the ballpark of 19,900 ringgits, often more. So the next benefit around college in Europe pertains to admissions. And honestly, this area has affected our lives as much as the major savings. But before we get into this, I want to say that the first thing to recognize is that in Europe, in continental Europe, the schools don't use admission rates as an indicator of educational quality or prestige. So because admissions isn't factored into global rankings, they have no reason to focus on them or to manipulate those numbers like is done in the US. I'm going to get into ranking in just a bit, but let's get back to admissions. So at most schools, the admissions process is less competitive, even at highly ranked reputable ones. Now, I'm talking about an entire continent here, so there are certainly exceptions, but generally speaking, each school has their own set of admissions requirements. And if you meet these requirements and there's room in the program, then you're admitted, period. The admissions criteria might be a certain test score, a set GPA, or as little as a high school diploma. So a number of very reputable European universities have programs without enrollment caps. So if you apply before the deadline and you have the admissions requirements that are very transparent, we're going to talk about those in a minute, you're in. It doesn't matter if they have higher grades than the ones required. It doesn't matter if you have more advanced courses. You're not being compared to the other applicants. You're being assessed to see if you have the qualifications that they feel are needed to succeed in the program. And then you have your first year as a student to prove that you have what it takes, which is just so refreshing to me. So one of the first things a school wants to know is whether the secondary education you have is the one that they would get in that country. And so they vary. Let's see, part of this slide got messed up. I'm sorry about that. So this varies from country to country. And I'm going to explain what these colors mean because it looks like the key was taken off. So I understand that many of you here today are using the A levels. I mentioned before that there are 1,900 English taught options. For about 1,600 of these 1,900s, you would be fine with 2 A levels or your SPM. I mean, I know that some of you have an SPM. If you have an IB diploma, that is the golden ticket for admissions. You can apply anywhere. So there are a few countries that require extra qualifications in order to make it the equivalent as their own high school diploma. This is the case for applicants from the US too. Students coming from the US usually use AP scores to meet these requirements. And these are the countries that have the red, some of the orange. Germany has their own major rigid sets of requirements. Usually an IB is what you'll need there. And part of the Netherlands. There are 2 types of universities in the Netherlands: universities of applied science and research universities. and research universities have these extra requirements. I'm about to tell you what those requirements are, but again, I just want to say that this is only about 350 of the options. So if you don't have these, if you have just your SPM or you have 2 A-levels, there's still tons of options for you. But those that do have this requirement, they require 3 A-levels in addition to 3 GCSEs in different subjects. Or if you have your SPM, you also need your STPM. Again, your IB diploma will get you into any of these. Alternately, 1 year of college credit can also meet these extra requirements, and this can be at a school in Europe. So if you don't have these requirements, you could go to a different school, maybe not your first choice, maybe a less expensive one, get that first year of credit, and then use those credits to apply to your first choice school. There are also some schools that have these, extra requirements that have a foundation year program. And these can be particularly good, especially if you need to work on the English proficiency side of things too. So let's talk about the English proficiency requirements. If your first language is English, they're waived. If your secondary school education is taught in English, it's also usually waived. Otherwise, it depends on the school. They're usually looking for scores in the range of 72 to 99 for TOEFL, or IELTS 5 to 6.5, depending on the school. But it's just, again, it's a very transparent process. They're going to say, here's what you need. And there's not a whole lot of wiggle room about it. So while I do provide consultations around the application process when people request it, most families find that the need for this is minimal. And the consultations are then more about determining the schools the students qualified for, helping with timeline, reviewing a motivation letter, which is sometimes required. It's just surprisingly straightforward and transparent, which I truly appreciate. So let's talk about educational quality now, because I'm sometimes asked whether the degree from Europe will be good back in the student's home country. And I also sometimes get emails from parents asking me why this school or that school is not in our database that we have that our members access. And there are some schools with really nice and fancy websites, but they aren't fully accredited. And so every school and program you find listed in the Beyond the States database is fully accredited. And when it's fully accredited, it's internationally recognized. So you can know that the degree would be recognized in Europe, in the US, back in Malaysia, in Japan, wherever you're going, it's internationally recognized. But I think what I want to do is let's dive in a little bit to our own beliefs around this. Many people from the US and elsewhere believe that the US offers the highest quality higher education. But here's something that's really disturbing. There was a study done by the Educational Testing Service that found that US students with a 4-year bachelor's degree from the US scored below their counterparts in 19 of 21 participating countries. So that's, they have their bachelor's degree. If the education's that great, they wouldn't have scored so low. And here's what's even worse. The US bachelor's degree holders scored the same as those who only had a high school education in 3 of the top performing countries. So given this, why would we think that US higher education is the best? And I think a lot of it is just plain old propaganda. And there's also the myth of American exceptionalism and the ranking system that is gamed to support their false claims. So as we're talking about rankings, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about why you shouldn't worry about ranking when you're looking at college in Europe. So I've mentioned them a few times already. The main reason is that global rankings, as opposed to, the US has their national rankings of, US news and all those national rankings. Global rankings are only use research-related criteria. That's the only thing. So they're not looking at curriculum, they're not looking at student body, they're not looking, the US news rankings have their own set of issues, but they do look at a ton of different factors. Global rankings look only at research-related criteria. So this disqualifies a lot of schools from even potentially being ranked, There are small schools that don't produce a lot of research, so they wouldn't be eligible. There are specialized schools. There are schools that focus on applied knowledge rather than research. So like anywhere, there are really incredible or reputable schools, there are good schools, and there are mediocre schools. And you just can't use the rankings as a way to determine that. So universities of applied science, for instance, are a type of university that focuses on practical learning that students will use in their career. They really don't conduct research at these universities, so they're not eligible for global rankings. That said, at Dutch universities of applied science, the accreditation itself is partially based on employability statistics. And so programs are developed with the university and the participation of companies. And so this really provides a win-win situation. Students are learning the skills that employers need, and then employers have a pool of candidates learning the skills and knowledge that they said that they need. So it's an educational outcome, and that's not assessed by global rankings. So there are also specialized business schools that aren't eligible for rankings, but they can pursue these sort of extra international accreditations. It's EQUIS, AACSB, and AMBA. Now remember, this is just for business programs. And these accreditations themselves, so they're extra. A school can be great without having these accreditations. It is an expensive and timely process. But if a school has any of these accreditations, you know that there have been things like things have been looked at, like the curriculum, like internationalization, like educational outcomes. Those are all things that these accreditations actually look for. So you know that they've been sort of vetted for that. Again, these are more relevant to the undergraduate experience than how much research was published. So before we get into some of the other benefits, I want to talk more about programs. You've heard me use a word, and I touched on it before, but it's super important to understand. So when a student applies to a university, like I said, they're not applying to the university as a whole. They're not even applying to a specific department at a university. They're applying to a specific program at the university. But I want to spend a little bit of time dispelling some concerns that I often hear around this. First of all, this does mean that your gen ed requirements, those first year courses, they're going to be related to your area of study. So this allows you to graduate knowing a lot about a specific area, but you do also have the opportunity to explore other interest areas through electives. A chemistry student, for instance, won't be required to take economics, like I was as a psychology major, but if they want to study economics, they can still do that through other avenues, through their study abroad semester, through things like honors programs, and again, like I said, through their electives. The other thing to note is that you don't have to know exactly what you want to study. There are liberal arts options. There are some programs that start broad and then specialize. And what I particularly like are the large number of multidisciplinary programs that combine different fields of study in a meaningful way. And then, there's just a lot of choice. Even if you do know specifically what you want to study, there are choices for that as well. So an example, I mentioned we have this service called the Best Fit List. So the student fills out this comprehensive questionnaire, gives me all sorts of information about what they like to do, what they want to study, all sorts of things. And I got one student who had very varied interests, very varied. That's a strange word combination. So he was interested in international business, in economics, in political science, in international relations, and in law, and didn't really know which one he wanted to focus on. So when I work on Best Fit Lists, the first thing I try to do is find programs that combine these areas. And this student was in luck. So unlike majors and minors, where they're two different areas sort of in a vacuum from one another, many programs in Europe combine these interest areas in a meaningful way. So a few of the options this particular student had was the International Business and Politics program at Copenhagen Business School. There's a Management of International Social Challenges program at Erasmus University. This is actually where my son is studying this program. And it looks at international challenges from the lens of politics, economics, law, and social perspectives in order to determine ways to find solutions to these programs. And of course, there are many PPE or PPLE programs. The P's and the L's sometimes change, but it's usually something like politics, philosophy, law, and economics. Sometimes they throw psychology in there as well. But I have yet to meet a student for which I could not identify programs that meet their interests. There really are options in just about every field of study you can think of. These are the general areas of study we have in our database, and each one has, 15, a large number of specific related areas of study related to these specifics. So they're the multidisciplinary programs I've already mentioned, but they're in other fields too, like sustainability studies are a favorite these days, and there are many choices for that. There are also a number of programs that start broad, and then students narrow down their area of focus. Often this is the case for business programs. You get the broad base during your first year or two, and then you can choose to specialize in a specific area of business, be it finance or management or marketing or so many other things. And then there are liberal arts programs, mostly in the Netherlands, that allow you to wait to decide on your area of study until after the first year. So what if they change their mind? Let me see, is this the next? Yes, okay. So this gets difficult because, again, in the US, all schools basically have this first year of gen ed requirements. And so if you transfer from one school to the other, that's usually pretty easy to do. Now, if you're changing in a comparable program, if you're changing from one political science program to another, there are probably some overlap courses that you can switch to. But if you're changing from chemistry to philosophy, there are not many overlap courses. So those really wouldn't transfer. But it's really still not the end of the world. We've lived through this in our family, and it's actually been really positive. So my son, Sam, he's the type of kid who knows what he wants to focus on, and he also has a range in interest. He was very interested in the Middle East, was teaching himself Arabic. So he started at the International Studies program at Leiden University. And on paper, this was great for him. But what he found as he started were two things. One, he hates economics. He'd never taken economics in high school, so he didn't know he would not like it. And also he was more interested in learning in a way that applied theory to real life, more about how to affect change as opposed to straight theory. So the first thing we did when he realized this is we went through the curriculum at Leiden for the next 2 years, and we discovered that economics played heavily into each of the years. And we also looked at Leiden for opportunities for practical application. And we saw he'd have to wait till the third year for that. So then we started looking at other programs that were aligned with his interests. And there were a few in which his credits would transfer, but the program he was most interested in, for a variety of reasons, uses a completely different educational approach, which is one of the things that appealed to him. And so they don't take transfer credits at all for this program. So we looked at the program in depth, and then we ran the numbers, and we found, these are the numbers here, even with the extra year, so now it's going to take him 4 years to get his bachelor's, even with the extra year, it still costs less than 1 year at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I also feel like it gave him the insight he needed to learn about his learning style, his preferences, and his interests. And that was really invaluable and is going to help him succeed in his studies and really in his life. So speaking of life success, as a parent, I'm really interested in educational outcomes. I want my kids to be able to find successful and fulfilling careers as a result of their education. And there's good news about this too. So particularly at business schools and at schools that focus on applied knowledge, internships are a required part of the study program with a semester set aside for them to complete. This is especially important given that employers hire around 50% of the interns who work for them, and in some fields it's closer to 75%. Now, I touched before on the fact that there are research universities and universities of applied science. The main difference, research universities are preparing their undergraduate students for master's degree programs. So that's more of the emphasis. You're going to be taking a lot of research related classes in order to prepare you for your master's. And then the employment stuff starts more during your master's degree, which we also have information on graduate programs as well. That said, if you are interested in, if you're at a research university and want to do an internship, you can usually choose to do that third year. Oh, something is happening to the screen here. Oh, there we go. You can usually choose to do that third year. There's a semester set aside. Usually the first semester. Oh,
it was pocket drawing.
Okay. Joey, are you able to mute that? Okay, there we go. So there's a semester set aside, usually the first semester of the third year. And again, that's for electives, that's for study abroad. And you also often can choose an internship. It's just not required or part of the structure as much at research universities. But going back to this, it's not just an internship with, some local companies. These internships can be done internationally or with multinational companies, which will help even if your student is coming back home afterwards. If they've done an internship with a multinational company, that can absolutely still help. So many schools will list the companies that they partner with on their website, and you'll find in many places these large, well-known international companies on the list. The other thing is there are really interesting Europe-specific internship opportunities as well, like international criminal courts, the World Health Organization, particularly in this day and age, the UN, NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center in Estonia. So you have this international experience of living in another country. You have an additional international experience by having peers from all over the world. And then there's the opportunity for additional international experiences. This can be done through studying abroad, which is mandatory with some programs and accommodated for all. And this is either done through bilateral agreements that the school has with other universities, or through a program that the EU has called the Erasmus Plus program. And it's developed to encourage international mobility. And this is a program that all students in Europe, including international students, can engage in. So unlike in the US, where study abroad semesters are often costly and just really unlikely due to the cost, this program works to remove the barriers. They provide stipends and they charge no additional tuition fees over what you pay at your home university. So it used to be limited to the EU, but now there are also options outside of the EU as well. In fact, we have one member who's just finishing her degree in Prague, and she was able to spend her semester in Malaysia, which she also loved. Of course, there are also less formal options for exploration. Europe is really compact and has a great transportation train system. So it makes exploring Europe over weekends and breaks really doable. I recently based myself in Vienna, and I was able to visit other cities in 3 other countries, all in train rides that were under 2.5 hours. So it might be a weekend trip home with a friend who's in Lisbon, or it might be a trip organized by the different international groups at the school. For instance, I was recently meeting with a group of international students in Budapest, and they were telling me about a trip that the student council had organized, and it was to Montenegro, which is a place I'm dying to go. And there was transportation, lodging, food, everything for the trip for the weekend was just 200 euros. So as a student coming from Malaysia, a place so rich with cultural diversity, I really do think you'll like the international student life in non-Anglophone countries. These programs are taught in English in order to draw students from all around the world, not especially to draw students from English-speaking countries. So your classes, like I mentioned, these include students from all over the world. So when you graduate from these programs that have this diversity, you have an awareness and appreciation of cultural differences. And there's a real emphasis on group work, which gives students experience working with people with different backgrounds and perspectives. So you learn to be flexible and adaptable and navigate unfamiliar circumstances. And these are the exact soft skills that employers are looking for. So in terms of other logistics around student life, generally speaking, the school is for education and the city is for student life. So you'll find a number of clubs and things like that through the school, but they usually don't own their own housing. There are student residences within the city, like dorms, and because the universities don't own them, it provides some market competition. So often the universities will reserve blocks of rooms for international first-year students. And just like your classroom, your student residences are then filled with others from around the world. And I've heard great things about like international dinners on Sundays that come from this. Most student residences are set up like apartments where students have a single bedroom, and then they share a kitchen and a bath with a small group of students. My son right now just shares a kitchen and bath with one other student. Price, of course, depends on the cost of living in the country. I've seen some as low as 100 euros a month and some as high as 700 euros a month, but I would say around 500 is pretty average. Universities have cafes and canteens on campus, but it's not like the meal plans that you have in the US. So students generally grocery shop for themselves, cook for themselves. It's something my son is finally getting the hang of after a year. So we have affordable options. We have transparent admissions processes. We have high quality education. We have meaningful and life-changing experiences. We have educational outcomes like employability and multicultural classmates and friends. So some of these benefits, you might first start thinking about these options because of the affordability, and the others are secondary. And that's often the case, but what many of the families we work with find is that those that you consider secondary benefits really rise tremendously in terms of significance once the student's going through them and they see how it's making them more independent and more confident, and the lens in which they see the world and their understanding of their role in the world is affected. And these are things I would want for my kids as much as affordable tuition. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A in a minute, and I'll turn the video back on then. I just do want to tell you a couple of things we can offer. As Joey mentioned, I wrote a book, College Beyond the States, and you can buy it on Amazon, but if you go to our website, beyondthestates.com, we do have an ebook version you can buy for very low price. And if you do the ebook, you also get an email that talks about some updates that have happened since I wrote the book. You know, there have been certain admissions changes and things like that, and you automatically get that email by buying from our website. Also, we help students and families navigate in a large number of ways. I don't want to take too much presentation time talking about that, but I'll tell you, we have memberships where you can kind of dive in and explore yourself. We have self-paced courses, and we have 2 services in which I personally handpick a list of 3 to 5 programs that fit the student's interests, goals, qualifications, and budget. As a thank you for listening to me today, I'd like to offer you $50 off of either of these 2 purchases with this coupon code. All of this, along with our different services, is in a handout that you have access to, where it describes different services. So now I would like to open it up for any Q&A.
Thanks, Jen. You have to stop sharing your screen and...
Oh, technology still baffles me. There we go.
Right. Okay, so please type your questions in the chat box. Oh, there's a question. Can you see the chat?
Let me go there. What is the most important component for an international student to become employable in Europe? So I think what I would do in that case is I would look for a University of Applied Science. If you want to become employable immediately after getting your bachelor's degree, you're going to have that experience. It really depends on area of study more than anything else. You know, if the student's looking at computer science, a lot of those options will be at an applied University of Applied Science. Again, business schools are also a great option if the student's interested in business for getting a job directly after. There's some business schools I've seen where they have an internship at the end of every year focusing on a different aspect of business. So when you graduate, you have a year's worth of experience already, which is pretty incredible, you know, at 20, 21 years old. Let's see, what the website is beyondthestates.com. The name of the book is College Beyond the States, right here. European schools that will change your life without breaking the bank. And all of that is on the handout as well.
Jen, I have a question.
Yeah.
When I look at European schools and their admissions requirement, they usually just say completion of high school without specifying like what grades you need. So how does one know like what sort of grades you need?
Well, if it says completion of high school, then you're okay. They just want to see the diploma more than the transcripts. So again, it's
So
they're saying
even for a high-ranking university, like
if there's a GPA requirement, they're going to say it. So, and if it's a non-selective program, and I think the non-selective is something that's really hard to wrap our heads around, you know, that at a highly ranked university, it can be non-selective. On our website, I did a podcast a couple of years ago, and there's one episode on our website where I interviewed an administrator from a highly ranked university about this whole, what do you mean grades don't matter? What do you mean it doesn't matter if I led the student council, you know, all of that. And he explains it well. So I'd encourage you to look at that podcast episode as well for anyone who's interested in that. But if it doesn't say a GPA and it's not selective, then you're in with the high school diploma.
I see, okay. But will students have issues progressing? I mean, they could get into year one, but would they be able to progress if
Not
they
if
didn't
they're,
have
not if they're not up for it. So, and that's the whole thing. So they have something called binding study advice. And so this means we're going to make it easier for you to get in. And part of that's around a philosophy of higher education, you know, that people should have access to higher education, even if when they were 14, 15 years old, they messed up at school, you know, that's not necessarily indicative of their potential. So even though it's more transparent to get in, once you get in, you have to pass a certain number of classes to be invited back to the second year.
Got it, got you. Okay, there are more questions in the chat.
Yeah. Is it important to learn the local language or is English enough? It depends on what country. So if you're in Denmark, if you're in the Netherlands, you know, English proficiency is incredibly high. We do note that in our database for the country area, how high the English proficiency is in that area. A lot of universities will have like a little summer online unit that's like, you know, learning Portuguese for college students, because what a university student will need to know how to say is very different than, you know, a middle-aged woman like me. You know, I want to know where the organic milk is at the grocery store. They don't really care about that. So they learn language skills that's more relevant to their day-to-day life, which is always just nice. It's nice to know when you go to another country how to say, you know, the very basics. And usually you can get along with that okay. Let's see, if you have an IB diploma, yes, they're all of the programs I'm talking about are taught entirely in English. So IB diploma and English language skills, you're good. You know, they don't expect, again, they have these programs to draw countries from all around the world. If Latvia, for instance, only conducted programs in Latvian, they wouldn't have very many international students, because how many people outside of Latvia speak Latvian? Not very many. So they have these in a more common language to draw students from everywhere, even without knowing Latvian, for instance. Which countries and region in Europe contain the best cost of living aside from the tuition costs? So if we're talking about just cost of living, you want to look east. Actually, I mentioned Estonia. Estonia is wonderful because there's cost of living and then still access to those higher cost of living aspects of life, you could say. Estonia, Czech Republic has an incredible cost of living. Whenever I was there, I was pulling out my currency converter because I couldn't believe that my mental math was right in terms of how low costs were. Hungary is another one that has a really affordable cost of living. If you're looking for affordable cost of living and you don't want to go east, then some areas of Spain and Portugal are also cost effective as well.
All right, okay. Another question here, we related to knowing the local language. So if a student doesn't know the local language, what impact does that have on his or her chances of post-study work opportunities?
Well, if they speak English, that's their internships are already going to be
In English.
in English. They're very multicultural. That said, if you're wanting to seek employment in a different country, learning some language of that is definitely a plus.
Okay.
There are some business programs in particular, and international relations and area studies that require you to learn language, not necessarily the language of where you're studying, but if you're in an international business program, you might decide that you want to focus on, some region of the world, and you're going to learn that language of the region of the world throughout the program as well.
Right, okay. Another question here. What do you think are the biggest barriers for international students, particularly from Asia, when considering Europe as a study destination?
Well, when considering, I think it's the same obstacle as most of the world has. And this is why we stopped just focusing on American families, and we work with families from Jordan and other parts of the world now too. There's just not one single source of information about all of these different countries. So that's the biggest obstacle. That's the biggest obstacle I found too. And that's why I created our resources, so that you can have information about a university in the Czech Republic and one in Denmark at the same time, and be able to kind of compare and contrast important information.
All right. In terms of readiness, how do you think students should prepare themselves to go abroad or to study in Europe? I think in Europe, that's just what I think. Students do need to be more independent. Do you think so? Compared to if they go to
Then
Australia?
where? Then going to the US?
Yeah, US schools, I think some of the schools can babysit them or
Yeah, that's what I always say. Often some people call the first year of college in the US sort of 13th grade, because in the US it goes to 12th grade, and then 13th grade, because it's sort of this transition year, which is a real bummer if you're paying $50,000 for a transition year. But yeah, it is more spoon-fed during that year. You're not going to be spoon-fed in Europe. There are absolutely resources. I'll give you an example of a student we had. This was one of our very first students. It was while I was still building Beyond the States, and our neighbor said, "Hey, can you help out my son? He'd like to go." So he started going to KU Leuven, which is in Belgium. It's like a top 50 university. And again, that transparent admissions process. So he was able to get in easily, but he didn't have the independence needed. He wasn't seeking out resources when he was struggling with a class. And I remember I went spring of his first year, and I had dinner with him and a couple of his friends, and he said, "I don't know if I'm going to pass. I don't know if I'm going to be able to come back. I just am really struggling with this class, and I don't think I'm going to pass it." I said, "Well, surely there's a study group or resources through the academic department that could help you." And he said, "No." And the girl who was with us, usually it's a girl, right? She said, "Well, yeah, there is. We get an email about that at the beginning of each quarter." So he just hadn't been resourceful. He didn't see that email or whatever. And as he was struggling, instead of going to the professor and saying, "How do I get help for this?" he just kept struggling. And because he wasn't independent, because he wasn't resourceful, because he wasn't proactive, he wasn't able to come back the second year.
Okay. Because I think a lot of our Asian students tend to be quite reliant. They do need a lot of support.
It's there. They just have to seek it out. It's absolutely there, as long as they ask for it. And asking for help can be a struggle for teens too.
Right. Another question. The schools that you mentioned that are very affordable, are they public or private universities in general?
Public. Actually, in a lot of Europe, in the US, private is often seen as more prestigious than public. And it's actually sort of the reverse in Europe. In many countries, not all, and many countries, public are seen as much more prestigious than private.
Okay. Looks like we've answered most of the questions. Just one more question here. You mentioned sustainability studies in your talk earlier. What country would you recommend for that? Like for environmental science, sustainability?
Well, that's one where it's interesting. That's an area of study my daughter's looking at as well. So I have some firsthand knowledge on that as well. And that's one in which there are good options in the Czech Republic. There are good options in Norway. There are good options in the Netherlands. Because it's becoming such sort of a hot topic, more and more schools are creating programs around that. So it's more about knowing, do you want to study that from sort of a science perspective, or more of sort of a policy perspective, and then looking at programs for that accordingly.
Right, okay. All right, so looks like we've answered all the questions. We'll be putting up some of this information in the Facebook group. So we'll upload the slides and I think a couple of other information that you've given us. So if you have not joined the CS Mastery Facebook group, I would encourage you to do that so that you have access to all this information and you can watch the recording again. So Jen, do you have any final advice for our audience here?
I would just encourage you to really explore, even if it's not in Europe, really look at what non-Anglophone countries have to offer. You know, the best choices are not necessarily just those that we know about or that our friends are talking about at dinner. There are a lot of wonderful choices that are lesser known.
All right. Okay. I'm just curious about your services. You mentioned the best fit list, and you've got a website and things like that. If once students have identified their options, and if they're interested to apply, do you help them with that?
Yes, we have a couple of ways we do that. I have a number of master classes. And so right now I'm running one which helps students, as I'm working with them as a group, helps them identify where they want to study. And then, so that's called On Your Mark. And then we have a master class called Get Set, which is just 3 weeks. And it provides assistance with the timeline, with an admission strategy based specifically on where the student's going to apply. And it also comes with feedback from me on their motivation letter. So we can do it through the class. We also have some self-paced classes around that and also consultation services. So it's really, we try to offer a range because what one person wants isn't what another one wants. And so we try to accommodate all of that.
All right. And how far ahead should students start applying?
Well, they don't start applying until their last year of high school. Some of the application periods open as early as October, but not before that. The first round of deadlines are usually January, but most aren't until March. But so I suggest, in an ideal world, you would spend your 11th grade, I don't know what it's called there, your next to last year of high school exploring the options, and then focus your last year of high school on applying. However, we have a lot of students who come to us in January of their last year, just having found out about the options. And so then we'll do a best fit list or fast track and just give more personalized service to do it in a shorter frame of time.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Jen. We'll be posting a link for the feedback form right now in the chat box. So please spend a few minutes filling up the survey. Thank you very much, Jen, for coming onto this summit. We'll leave the link on for a couple more minutes. And please come back tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the last day of the summit. We've got 4 sessions tomorrow, and we'll be starting at 11 a.m. Kuala Lumpur time, 12 noon if you're watching from Japan. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, audience, for all your feedback, participation, and questions. Have a great evening. Thank you.